Oh, hey guys, thought I'd share a little bit about an issue that comes up with my students quite frequently, and people even write me questions about this subject. And the basic idea is there's so much to learn in trying to study jazz guitar. I'm feeling overwhelmed with all of the things that I'm supposed to get a hold of, get a handle on. So I want to talk about this a little bit because it really becomes can become a kind of crippling issue. And in fact, sometimes people will even kind of give up or get really, really frustrated with being overwhelmed like this. So the first thing to remember when you're studying, whether it's in a university situation or a music school or just privately on your own or with a teacher or online or one of my courses on TrueFire or whatever it happens to be, is that first of all, you can have fun while you're learning. And enjoy it. It doesn't have to be drudgery. One of the reasons it becomes drudgery is that we have too high of an expectation and too much on our plate, because we kind of believe this notion that we have to learn all of everything in order to be a good and solid musician. And so let's look at that a little bit. No one will be able to do it if they follow this advice. For instance, like you've heard this, learn all your arpeggios and learn them from every finger, beginning on every finger and in every inversion and in all 12 keys, and be able to play through them in the cycle of fourths. And of course, that's all really wonderful, but if you think that you have to be able to do that before you can go out and sit in for the first time or put together a little group or get together with your friends and play some tunes, then you're going to be frustrated because it's not realistic. Better is to learn one small bit of all of that really well and then immediately incorporate it into your playing. Of course, if you're learning tunes and you're learning melodies of those tunes, then those melodies have all this stuff in them mostly. So you're already learning a little bit of it as we go along. But let's say pertaining specifically to arpeggios, melodic arpeggios for the purposes of improvising. I'll give you an example of how I might think of organizing it and then going about learning it. So let's say we decide that we're going to learn some arpeggios. First of all, I prefer to learn them in 4-note groupings rather than the larger. So this F major 7 rather than this. Right? The reason is that we often want to have our music organized in groups of 4 notes because it's so much more malleable. We're often superimposing or using things in these smaller sections. To be able to get the technique to be able to whip through that big arpeggio, in 2 beats or a bar of music is maybe a little steep, but everybody can go play a simple 8-note line based on an arpeggio that's 4 notes long and then put it together with another arpeggio or similar arpeggio or the next octave of the same arpeggio. So how do we go about learning the arpeggios? People say, well, I got to learn my arpeggios. Well, first of all, they're not yours until you learn them. So let's get that straight. But we don't have to learn them all in such a extravagant way. I mean, I even had friends back in the day that said, well, I'm not going to play, and I'm just going to study for 1 year and get all my arpeggios together. And I'm not going to go any gigs. I'm not going to play or jam with my friends or anything. And that seemed quite extreme, and it didn't work out very well for that particular person because they got frustrated and gave up and thought, I'll never be able to do this task. So we want to be able to take a small bit. So what's a small bit? First of all, let's say we start with the 5 basic chord qualities: major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, minor 7 flat 5, and diminished 7. Now these 5 qualities all have something in common with each other, and they can be learned in a way that's helpful and common. So let's say we pick this F note right here. Major 7th arpeggio off of that note with my little finger playing the root lives right there at the 5th fret area. To make that dominant, there's two choices. That's probably the better choice, or you could play that this way. Now all I did to make that arpeggio is flat the 7th, so it's relatable to that F major triad. There's the 7th. Here's the flat 7. If I wanted to take it further, I could make a major 6. But we're not going to delve into that because that's a variation on something else. Then to make it minor, I know the 3rd is, I can flat it. To make it minor 7 flat 5, flat the 5th. The minor 7th arpeggio can be fingered in two reasonable ways. One is like this, where the flat 7's over here. That way the 5 and the flat 7 live on the same fret. Or you could play them this way, which is a little more in keeping with the previous ones. So in one area of the instrument, you could also play that this way. Either way, see them as the same. Right, dominant 7. I suppose you could play that one too, but we don't want to have so many options that we get confused. It's a good idea to know that that note's over there, but we want to keep things a little tighter so we can have a doability factor. So major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, minor 7 flat 5, and diminished 7th. These are all related to each other in that the shape of these things is very similar. So that means that by learning one thing, an F major 7, I equated it to these other 4 things, and I can see how they relate to each other, and I'm learning a pod of information that makes sense. It's not just every F major 7th arpeggio on the board until I learn them all, then every F7 arpeggio on the board, etc. We want to make sure we can use this stuff in a way that's can happen quickly when we're playing. Now, if you've done that, I think it would be relatively easy to say, oh, well, where else can that formula live? Similar fingerings, although it's accounting for the B string being tuned differently, but it's still the same type of shape and it's the same spelling of the arpeggios. So then I can take something that I learned here and then I can quickly understand how it would be applied here, and then I could do the same thing here. So now I've got a bit of information, 5 chord qualities, and they all start either on the little finger or the 3rd finger and go this way. I call these shapes that move toward the nut, just because that's just an easy visualization. And so now I've learned a bunch of stuff here, but all the things I learned are related to each other. Okay, then here's the next thing that I think is important. Maybe even before you venture down here or up here to duplicate these arpeggios, try playing them on that set up and down this way so you really get used to the fingering. Or you can play all 5 of them and then move up and play all 5 of them. Both ways are valuable. Another way that I think is very handy, play them up, then take the top note, move up 1 fret, and come down the same type of chord 1 fret higher, and then go from the bottom. That's very, very handy because very often when we play arpeggios in an improvisational setting, they're moving and sliding from one place to another. We might play something like right, right? That's just a bunch of the same arpeggio moving down chromatically. Or that's an old cliche line. Those kinds of ideas that I'm playing badly right here. So to practice moving them up and down by sliding or gliding up from one fret to the next, I think is very handy. So you could play all 5 of the shapes, move up 1 fret, play all 5 of the shapes, move up. By doing this, you're training your ear to hear the sound of the arpeggios. You can't really just go by visual, and you can't really just just paint by numbers or plug and play. You really have to eventually start to hear these things. So that's a very important aspect of doing the repetitions necessary to get your fingers to do it. Very often overlooked aspect is you also learn the sound of these things. So you should pay attention to the sound of them. Don't just sort of check out and let your fingers move. Really listen to the sound. So we took a very small bit of information, 5 chord qualities, and we learned them all in one spot in relationship to each other with a common type of fingering. Of course, the fingering changes every time the chord quality changes, but there's a cohesiveness to the 5 fingerings. And then the final thing is you've done your repetitions, you've practiced them, and they're still fresh in your mind. And then you play a song, and you try and use those shapes as part of your improvisational vocabulary, right? Now, for instance, you might have been playing Autumn Leaves in the key of E minor with the key center method. Right? Or whatever, just hoping to have good combinations of notes by noodling around in a G major scale. Well, that's a good thing to do, especially at first. But now, on that middle set of strings, we can take and play an A minor 7th arpeggio. We can play a D 7th arpeggio. We can play a G major 7th arpeggio, and a C major 7th arpeggio. That one's a little funny because of the open strings. Play F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and B7, all using the same fingerings for one of the appropriate chord quality. Now, right away you're going to say, but Tim, nobody does that. That's not good. Well, of course, you're right. Not everybody, it's not true that nobody does that, but it's not a very efficient way of playing arpeggios, incorporating them into a chord progression. But you will notice that you're going to learn these shapes and the various chord qualities by doing that. And then, of course, you might discover that there are other shapes that you can learn that you can incorporate so that you have better voice leading between the arpeggios. You don't have to start on the root. There's all sorts of other solutions later. But at first, we want to make sure that you don't think, oh, in order to learn my arpeggios, I suddenly have to be as brilliant as Bud Powell at it. And if I'm not as brilliant as Bud Powell at it, within a week or two, I'm somehow a big failure. So just get used to using these shapes because they're new to you, perhaps. And if you're used to playing scales, arpeggios have a different kind of approach. They have different picking and different fingerings and things. So we're running out of time, but I want to just remind you that the best way not to get overwhelmed is to make sure your goals are doable. The doability factor, I think, is very important and often overlooked because we do hear things like, well, learn all of your arpeggios, quote unquote, and learn how to play them from any finger, quote unquote, and then learn how to play them in all 12 keys and in cycle 4 and all these other things. Well, eventually that would be wonderful. We can do that. And you'll certainly be able to have a lot of skill with your arpeggios if you can do that. But what do you do in the meantime? You still want to play music. You still want to get this stuff going. And I think it's actually better to learn some small thing that's pretty clear and easily accomplished, and then apply that thing right away. until you feel like, oh man, I'm done with that thing. I'm bored with that. I've done that. Well, no, you might not want to throw that out just because you're bored with it. You just want to add something else. Or it's not efficient to jump around like that, so I better add something else. And then you're on the path to incrementally learning the things you need to learn in order to become more well-versed and more skillful. Okay? So I think that's enough for now. The big message here is take your time, learn something clearly, implement it as quickly as you can or as soon as you can, and use it in music so that you can then add to that and add to that and add to that, all inside of musical context. If you're playing with your friends and you try and go for a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio and you can't grab it, well, then that means you go back to the drawing board with that and you maybe come up with a new fingering that works better for you, or just shed the one that you aren't as comfortable doing and work on the physical aspect of that. Then the next time you play, you can use it and it'll be better. I guarantee it. All right. So make sure to subscribe and do all those YouTubey things. And until next time, I hope that this was helpful.